Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and today we're going to be joining Harkoa in the Japanese Tier 5, formerly battle cruiser but up-armoured between the world wars and now a battleship, the Congo, one of 4 such ships built for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Well, technically the first was built in Britain, and her 3 sister ships, the Haruna, Hei and Kirishima, were all built in Japan. And yes, I realise I'm probably horribly mispronouncing those names. Tier 5 can be a bit of a rude awakening to players new to World of Warships. Prior to Tier 5 you have protected matchmaking, where you'll only ever face ships at most 1 tier above you. At Tier 5, however, the gloves come off and you get treated to the true World of Warships experience where you can and will face ships anything up to 2 tiers higher than you. That is not the case, however, in this particular battle. This is an all Tier 5 battle. The bad news for Harkoa, since he's in a battleship, is that there are 4 destroyers per team. But that's really about as bad as it gets with this particular matchmaking. The good news is, because everybody here is Tier 5, there are no aircraft carriers. And because submarines only exist in random battles at tiers 6, 8 and 10, there are also no submarines, so there's a decent chance that everybody might actually be able to have some fun in this battle. Further good news, despite the relatively high number of destroyers in this particular battle, something that generally makes battleship captains very, very nervous, down here at Tier 5 there are not an awful lot of destroyers that are capable of stealth torpedoing. With the exception of the T-22, and both teams only have 1, all of the other destroyers present in this battle, like the Nicholas over there, have to get spotted before they can get to within torpedo launch range. This inability to open water stealth torpedo is the sort of thing that's meant to teach captains like the Nicholas over there to use natural concealment in the shape of islands to sneak up on their opponents in order to get those torpedo kills in, something that a lot of destroyer captains fail to learn at Tier 5 and even more depressingly have still failed to learn by the time they get to Tier 10. Tier 5 is also where light cruisers, like the Omaha over there and the friendly Omaha who just got spanked by the enemy Texas, are supposed to learn that it's a really, really bad idea to be given broadside to battleship guns, because as we all know by now, Tier 5 cruisers are made out of citadels. Oh, I've just noticed, this is actually quite funny. So the friendly Omaha, who was the first one in this battle to die to the guns of the enemy USS Texas, his name was Sink So Fast. Oh, we've just lost another Tier 5 light cruiser. There goes the Emile Bertin. Oh, lordy lordy, there's another one, the Königsberg. You know what this is, don't you kids? It's the Tier 5 light cruiser show. Yep, there it is. Oh wait, hang on, more irony. I've just realised that the Emile Bertin, who got set on fire and burnt down by the enemy Agincourt, his name was Firefox. I'm not making this up. The Königsberg, who just got utterly spanked, might have lived if he'd kept going and gotten an island between himself and Harkoa, but no, he's turned around, so he got spanked going one way, and then he got spanked going the other way. In fact, there are ships going down left, right and centre here. Both teams have lost 4 ships, that's 8 casualties, and the game's not even 4 minutes old. I guess you do kind of have to temper your expectations, because despite the fact that Tier 5 is technically about as mid-tier as it gets... Oh no. Oh dear. Well, the good news, the Nicholas dodged the torpedoes. The bad news... Yarp. Great news for Harkoa, of course. That means the enemy team only have 1 destroyer left. Of course, it is the T-22. It's the only destroyer on the enemy team that was capable of open water stealth torpedoing in the first place. But anyway, I was talking about tempering your expectations, because while technically Tier 5 is as mid-tier as it gets, it's really low tier. People at Tier 5 are still learning the game. There are plenty of people at Tier 10 who are still learning the game as well, of course, but, well, people at Tier 5 at least have the excuse that they're still new. Now that doesn't of course mean that you can't have a good laugh watching them do all of this dumb shit, but you should realise that you're laughing at people who probably don't really know what they're doing anyway. And at this kind of level, shouldn't really be expected to. I suppose at some point I should really start talking about what's actually going on in this battle, because despite being ahead by 1 kill, Harkoa's team are still behind on points to the tune of about 100 points. Thanks to the enemy team grabbing and holding on to 2 of the capture circles early, Harkoa's team only taken 1, and only now threatening to capture their 2nd. With the loss of his teammates, the enemy Cavour over there, the Italian tier 5, is now out of position, and to his credit he has realised it and is attempting to turn around and get the hell out. Harkoa, of course, equally determined that he's not going to get away with it. Lining up for a full broadside from the Congo's 8 extremely long-range 14-inch guns. Unfortunately, the Cavour is either varying his throttle in order to attempt to throw off Harkoa's shots, or Harkoa just misjudged how quickly the Cavour was moving. Meanwhile, the enemy Hawkins over there has just attracted more than his fair share of fire, and the friendly Königsberg was last seen given an uncomfortable amount of broadside to that Italian tier 5 battleship as Harkoa's attention is distracted, and yep, sure enough. Tier 5 light cruisers. Actually, the enemy Hawkins that just died. The Hawkins is a tier 5 heavy cruiser, isn't it? Although, to be completely fair, it has... well, it doesn't even really have heavy cruiser guns. It has 190mm guns, and it definitely has light cruiser armour. I think we can all agree that it's a tier 5 not very good cruiser. Meanwhile, just taking a look... yep, the Cavour's gone down. By a miracle, the Königsberg survived. Harkoa, however, a bit more concerned at the moment about the enemy Congo. Well, that's an awful lot of broadside that Congo's given, isn't it? It'll take quite some time to get these front turrets swung around. In the meantime, you may wish to angle away, because the Congo has good guns, but it definitely doesn't have good armour. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. Rear turrets are about ready to go again. And that Königsberg is definitely sick of living. Broadsiding a battleship at 7 kilometres when you have less than 1,000 health left. And yet there may very well be a method to his madness, because the Congo is more concerned about the Nicholas, as well he probably should be. The thing is, though, well, there are a couple of poor decisions going on in the enemy Congo over there. First, not taking the opportunity to sink the Königsberg, even though he may have been more concerned about the Nicholas. The Nicholas had already launched his torpedoes. So the enemy Congo made the decision to shut the barn door after the horse had already bolted, and that robbed him of the opportunity to kill the Königsberg, because the Nicholas's smokescreen is now blocking line of sight. Also, he turned in instead of turning away. Oh, he has managed to actually get the Königsberg. Oh well, fair enough. I suppose it was only a matter of time. But by turning in, he was committing to fighting a Nicholas, a Königsberg, and a pair of Congos by himself. And he still is, with the exception of the Königsberg, which basically means he's died. And that has allowed Harkoa's team to narrow what was a 150-point gap. They are still losing, with 2 caps per team, despite being 1 kill ahead. But now they're only losing by about 50 points. There are still 11.5 minutes of this battle to go, however, so we haven't quite yet reached the point where the enemy team suddenly start trying to win harder than they already are. With this much time remaining, it's not as if the enemy team can just run away, hide and win on points. Harkoa's team would take all 4 of the caps, the enemy team would lose. At the same time, however, while you do still have to fight the enemy team, you want to be playing defensively. You definitely don't want to be just throwing ships away. Especially not when you only have 4 ships left to begin with. On the same regard, from the perspective of Harkoa's team, when you do have that 1 ship advantage and you are behind on points, you definitely don't want to be giving ships away and handing the enemy an even bigger points lead, which means this McCoyan over here is playing an extremely dangerous game with that USS Texas. Fortunately for him, the Texas is focused on Harkoa, and Harkoa was perfectly angled. What happens next is an incredibly slow-motion game of chicken. Harkoa is reloading the armor-piercing, because at the moment the Texas is actually not very well angled against Harkoa. However, it's going to take some time to get that ammunition changed, and the Texas has managed to angle in. What the Texas is doing right now as he steams towards this cap circle is basically a repetition of what happened earlier with the enemy Congo. You see, the Texas has already made the decision that's going to get him killed as Harkoa holds his fire, waiting for a better angle. He's coming closer, instead of moving away. So he's got shots coming in from the McCoy on one side, and any second now he's going to have shots coming in from the Harrier, which is basically another Congo, from the other side. And of course he has Harkoa right in front of him, so he's now caught in a three-way crossfire. The danger from Harkoa's perspective is that the Texas is going to try to ram him, and he needs to avoid that at all costs, so here's where he gives the Texas his chance. And the Texas does some damage, but it's nowhere near enough. Now with the Texas, again, trying to angle away from the Harrier, he's now given a beautiful broadside to Harkoa, and now it's Harkoa's turn. He's also being chased by Nicholas, who's going to attempt to torpedo him, but with some hopelessly optimistic torpedoes. There's no way those are going to catch. Even a battleship as slow as the Texas steaming away from you, not dropped at that kind of range. The McCoy has managed to get around him and is going to be launching torpedoes from the other side, as well as raking his superstructure with armour piercing. And it's at this point where the Texas probably realises that he may have made a fairly serious error of judgment. I mean, just look at that. It's difficult to imagine how the Texas could possibly have put himself into a worse situation than that. So the Texas's noble sacrifice has put Harkoa's team ahead on points for the first time. Not by much, it's only a 30-point lead. They do have a 2-ship advantage, however, and they're busy swapping capture circles. So at the moment, even the capture points are fairly neutral. Now that's the British Tier 5 Premium, the Agincourt. Its guns are absolutely terrible. I mean, they are comically bad. But its secondaries are hilarious. It is not the fastest ship in the world, however, and with slightly less than 8.5 minutes to go, and with the enemy team now by a narrow margin losing, and still 2 ships behind, now would probably be the time for the Agincourt to be heading away from Harkoa's team, instead of what he is doing, which is of course the exact opposite. It may be, however, that the Agincourt captain has just realised 3 things. 1. Those secondaries really can hurt that Harrier. 2. The Agincourt's guns may be terrible, but it does have 14 of them, and if they're going to work, it's going to be at ranges like that. And 3. With around about 7 minutes to go, his team could really use another kill, not just to level the odds slightly in their favour and increase their chances of actually surviving the next 7 minutes, but to put them ahead on points once again, at which point they need to start getting the hell out of there and playing defensive and hoping to run the timer down. So what the Agincourt did there wasn't necessarily suicidal. Well, it wasn't suicidal at all. He is surviving, just kind of barely. And the Harrier has lost about half of the health that he had going into that fight, and is now in a crossfire between the Agincourt and the Königsberg. Harkoa sees his chance, unloads the 14-inch armour piercing, and that has to be the luckiest Königsberg in the world. 5 hits with 14-inch AP, none of them even penetrations, certainly none of them citadels, and the Königsberg managed to get torpedoes away. Which is extremely bad news for the Harrier. And it's even worse news for the team because the Harrier has just thrown it. With slightly more than 6 minutes remaining, the enemy team are now comfortably ahead on points. They have 2 cap circles to Harkoa's team's 1, although Harkoa is going to want to, and in fact is, killing the throttle here in order to slow down and stay inside this cap circle in order to flip it and at least equalise the caps in order to prevent the enemy team from surging any further ahead on points in the time remaining. But even if he is successful in doing that, and he very probably will be, and in fact is, it's still not enough by itself. They need to sink at least 1 and preferably 2 more enemy ships. But we have still not yet reached the point where the enemy team need to stop trying to win any harder than they already are. Because the Agincourt, in his defence, couldn't really avoid what is about to happen because he was sailing in this direction anyway. Now it's true that he could have done slightly more to avoid what is about to happen once Harkoa opens fire. He could have at least angled away or in a little, and might have survived a little bit longer. He'd angled away, he probably still wouldn't have made it out alive. If he'd angled in, he wouldn't have taken nearly as much damage from those 14-inch armour-piercing shells, and could potentially have managed to take Harkoa with him by going for the ram. Instead, he's attempting to let his secondaries do the work for him, and well, the Agincourt's secondaries are no joke, but he took so much damage from Harkoa's 14-inch guns when he came around the corner that he just was denied the time that he needed to get those secondaries working and finish off the job. However, despite the loss of the Agincourt, he still hasn't really thrown it, because his team are still ahead on points. A lead that is then reinforced as the enemy T-22 finishes off the friendly Nicholas, and yet we're still not really at the point where the enemy team need to stop trying to win any harder than they already are, because both teams have 2 cap circles. Harkoa's team are threatening both of the enemy cap circles, and the enemy team are going to have to fight their way through Harkoa's ships in order to flip any of theirs. So running away and winning on points is no longer an option for the enemy team. They need at least 1 kill, which is why this is so bizarre, because the T-22 clearly came out in order to launch torpedoes, took a hit, survived the hit, had all the time in the world to get the torpedoes away, and didn't. And of the 2 ships left alive on the enemy team, well, you can forgive the T-22 for lurking around attempting to ambush a battleship at point-blank range. The Königsberg, not so much. I mean, he did get away with it once, but that's the kind of luck that you only get once in a battle in a Tier 5 light cruiser, which means that the T-22 could still do it. There's only a 14-point difference with 3 minutes to go, although the McCoyan is flipping the cap circle at Charlie, but if the T-22 can land the torpedoes and kill himself a battleship, he can go undetected, survive the shots from McCoyan, grab himself 100 points, run away, hide, and possibly win if he lands 3 torpedoes. So of course, from a range of less than 2 kilometres, he launched 6 and only hit with 2. So, just for a fairly pleasant change, we finally got ourselves a reasonably well fought, despite the relative inexperience of the majority of the players concerned, and close battle where it wasn't decided by which team was capable of throwing the hardest. There was never really any point where either of the teams absolutely had the advantage, and in the time remaining just needed to stop trying to win harder and be satisfied with what they had. So we don't get to see that kind of game around here very often. And well done Harkoa on a thoroughly well-deserved Kraken Unleashed and high caliber, and thank you for sending the game in. Everybody else, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.